Live everywhere.
Daily Co's Radio on netrootsradio.com presents
David Waldman. Kagro in the Morning Show. Now, here's David Waldman.
Hey, good morning, everybody. How you doing? It is Tuesday, January 2nd, 2018. We don't need to go back and erase the tape of the podcast and tape over it with 2018. We got it right out of the bat. I don't know whether I'm going to write any checks this year. That problem is pretty much eliminated. Now a dated joke. I'm still writing 2002 on my checks because I haven't written one since then. A lot of people, of course, still do. If you're in front of me at the grocery line writing one, beware, I guess. But, well, I'll let you get away with it still. Sorry, a little glitchy this morning. Just a little rust shaking off after the short break. Just kind of had to take a New Year's Day break as well. Had plans during the early part of the weekend for recording a Monday show so as not to leave you without, but I figured you'd probably sleep in too. I wanted to do the same. Of course, Sunday night, not really available to me to record that since it was New Year's Eve. And, we were all having a fun time at home. Doing a goddamn jigsaw puzzle, by the way. 1,000-piece Ravensburger puzzle. Probably nothing to those of you who are true puzzle enthusiasts, but it wrapped us up for a good day or two. Still working on it. And, all right. So, like I said, shaking off the rust this morning and slightly distracted by the news out of, where was this? They were in Zimbabwe. The news out of Zimbabwe today. Big headline. I saw it tweeted by, well, let's take a look. We'll trace the whole thing here. It is David Simon, having been retweeted into my timeline by Greg Green. Thanks, Greg. David Simon tweeting today, of course, the television writer David Simon. When I was a newspaperman, he said, it was resolved among the veterans that the worst end any man could have, and probably any woman too, but he may have been a newspaper man a long time ago. And we forgive that sort of thing occasionally. Anyway, the worst end a man could have, and really there aren't very many women that would die this way, would to endure a death so cosmically ironic that you made the AP wire as what was then known as a bright, B-R-I-T-E. And today's bright, I guess, it is suggested, is from the Daily Mirror, one of our favorite rags from overseas. Not really. We're taught to hate it. But they're very keen on gun deaths. It's very interesting. And this one, sort of a gun death. Big game hunter crushed to death by elephant after it collapsed on top of him after being fatally shot. So we lost the elephant in this one. But the big famous professional big game hunting guide has been killed. So we have that going for us, I guess. The Daily Mirror reports it this way. Let's see. A female elephant stormed the group of hunters and lifted Thunis, I'm guessing, Thunis, Theunis, Botha, like PW, I guess, with her trunk before falling on him. There's a little bit of video, but we're not going to bother with that. I'm reading it on my phone, by the way. A professional big game hunter is dead after he was crushed by a wounded elephant as it was fatally shot. Thunis Botha, 51, was on a hunt in Gwai, Zimbabwe, when his group was charged by 4 breeding elephants, who probably didn't want to be hunted. A female elephant picked up Botha in her trunk after he fired at the others and collapsed on top of him, crushing him to death after she was shot by another hunter. Heartbroken friends, the guy, he had friends, described the married father of 5, and that is somewhat tragic, yes, as a legend, while opponents of big game hunting offered little sympathy following his passing. I don't know how much sympathy you can certainly offer the kids sympathy, I guess, although they probably are also growing up to become big game hunters. Don't do it, kids. It killed your dad. So yeah, he takes wealthy foreigners out to shoot leopards and elephants, and he died. So there you go. I don't know what else to tell you about that. I don't think we're going to bother reading the entirety of the rest of the story. It's just going to upset you. We'll just leave it at the part that you like. He's dead, and he was crushed by an elephant. That's some way of starting the year, eh? Well, there's more, of course. Today being a Tuesday, though, we are a little bit behind the 8 ball in that I'm usually able to depend on Greg Dworkin to come by and kick off a week for us. with his collection of stories. So he's not available to do that on Tuesday, though we expect to see him back on Wednesday. So we'll get a Wednesday, Thursday out of him, hopefully, this week. And but he did, of course, as usual, write the abbreviated pundit roundup, and we can always lean on that just to get our footing for the morning. It was a big weekend, despite the fact that the president, that's Donald Trump still, spent the day outside of, or spent most of the week outside of Washington, D.C. He went, of course, to Mar-a-Lago just before Christmas. And then, of course, on Christmas, tweeted that he was back to work on December 26th. What he meant, of course, was all of you need to go back to work so that the country runs. I am going to continue golfing. That is not news to anyone. You know all about that. But it's still definitely, worth mentioning that he did that, because it was rather ludicrous. I mean, it's been expressed well in the tweets. Lots of people making counts of the number of times he's been to the golf course or the number of rounds of golf he's played. I know I saw at least one Twitter follower mention that he was playing golf at what amounts to about 3 times the rate that Obama ever played. Lots of mention of that. I don't know. I guess the New Year wrap-up gave people the opportunity to look at this and make comparisons. And, of course, to remind us all that during the 2016 election campaign, Trump was nonstop in his criticism of Obama for playing too much golf, for just ignoring the issues facing the country and playing golf instead, and of course swearing on a stack of Art of the Deal prints that he, as president, would never have time even to play golf because he'd be too busy making America great again. And of course, it doesn't take very much at all to make America as terrible as he promised, and he's doing that in between trips to the golf course, and I think at a record pace. And I can't find the tweet at the moment, but it looks like the number of rounds that he has played to date wasn't reached by Obama, who I think was probably the most frequent golfer prior to Trump. And I think that might even be, a fair and true assessment. The guy liked to play golf, and when he would go on vacation for a week, he'd play 3-4 rounds during that week. Trump plays, of course, every day, and I don't know if Obama ever did that. I'm sure he played a couple of days in a row. But at any rate, Obama, I think it was determined, only reached Trump's current 11-month total in his third year, at the end of his third year of his presidency. In 2011, he was, end of 2000, like December 2011, he hit the number that Trump has hit in his 11 months since January of 2017. So I don't know. I mean, I feel like that needed to be laid out there again, but whatever. Oh, look, I have a note here. Rebecca Roman says that the Daily Mirror story is from May. I don't know why it's circulating again, but it sure is funny. And okay, it's still relevant. I mean, he's still dead. That's so we can start the show that way and say Theonis, whatever his name was, Bota, still dead, like Generalissimo Francisco Franco, who took a lot longer to die than Theonis did, but well, his kids are over it then, so it's fine. It's been months. Come on, snowflakes. I don't know what to tell you. All right, well, that's news. I always, I should have learned by now to check that. Always check the dates on these news flashes. It could be from any time, especially gun stories, because they happen, of course, all the time. And, of course, we have some already, which we may or may not discuss. Nothing record-breaking, except the speed with which we were back to counting the number of mass shootings in a year. The Gun Violence Archive tweeting over the weekend that very briefly all the numbers were reset to 0, of course, with the new year. As a matter of fact, let's just take a quick look for statistics-wise. They're not up to the minute or anything, But resetting all the counters to 0 on January 1st at midnight. It is, of course, January 2nd, Tuesday at 9 in the morning. Total number of incidents, total number of gun incidents for which the management, let's say, of the gunviolencearchive.org has found in news searches 110 news stories, separate incidents involving guns. That would include fatalities, woundings, accidents, intentional shootings, crimes, etc. How many children ages up to age 11 have been killed or injured by guns so far this year? 2 already. Do you feel like keeping up with that kind of news? We'll take a look. The fatal accident, or the fatal incident anyway, was in Alabama. Little wonder about that. Child dies after accidental shooting, reports WBRC Fox 6 News from Birmingham, Alabama. Let's stop that video there. Jefferson County's Sheriff's Office is reporting a child has been accidentally shot, and looks like an 8-year-old boy who accidentally was shot. 7 years old, the update. Handling a gun in a bedroom when it discharged. And he was struck. I wonder how it discharged. Of course, what it looks like, once again, family member, possibly parent, left an unsecured weapon at home because it's got to be ready, in condition to fire, can't be locked, can't be unloaded. In case ISIS breaks in at any moment, you got to be able to protect the family. But instead, once again, the family will be burying a member in 2018. I bet you didn't expect that, having made it successfully to the end of 2017. Injury reported out of Los Angeles. This a more frequent occurrence, believe it or not, on New Year's Eve and July 4th as well. You know what I'm talking about. 9-year-old boy in Los Angeles hit by a stray bullet during New Year's festivities. Suspected that it was, of course, more gratuitous celebratory gunfire. So as the day wears on, we will likely find more stories about that. Hitting people is relatively rare with their celebratory gunfire, but every July 4th and New Year's Eve, there are people hit. We haven't missed one yet. But there is also usually some 24 reports of cars, homes, businesses, etc., damaged by falling bullets. So we always have to look forward to tallying that. Let's see what other news the Gun Violence Archive has to share statistically. 68 injuries, 37 people killed by guns so far. It is, again, January 2nd at 9 a.m., 37 gun deaths logged to date this year. 3 teenagers injured or killed. 1 mass shooting logged. 1 officer-involved incident where the officer was shot or killed. 3 officer-involved incidents where subject or suspect has been shot and killed. 1 claimed home invasion. 1 claimed defensive use. And 5 accidental shootings so far. That's actually a pretty good number. I bet that number will rise as between January 1st at midnight and January 2nd, once the news reports of the cars and homes begin to roll in the next 2 to 3 days. That's sort of the timing pattern that these things go by. Believe me, I know. I've been following it for a while. All right. So let's see, back to our routine. Oh, yes, I nearly forgot at this point. I guess I should remind you, 15 minutes into the show, that Daily Ghost Radio is live now. Bill did it on time, right before we went on the air, letting you know that I'd be returning. Kagro X returns from the year 2017. I've been time traveling to warn us that Trump isn't a very good president. People, we must listen to the time traveler. That's true. The 25th Amendment. I left it behind for you in colonial days, and it's time to perhaps pick it up and have a look at that. All right, well, let's see what Greg left for us in the abbreviated pundit roundup. Just for fun, let's see. Oh, he leads off with the Wall Street Journal, of all publications. Former Obama administration officials vie to unseat House Republicans. That is a big deal, and it did get a lot of attention over the weekend. Not your responsibility, by the way, necessarily, folks. Thank you for your service to our country, etc. And I can see that you're eager to get back into the game. Do be careful, though. And certainly don't consider yourselves entitled to the seat. You will be sorely disappointed. But we're glad to have you back in the game and welcome your entry into the primary contests. Let's see, we have Washington Post reporting, Democrats think 2018 will be a good year, but are they realistic about their own problems? Dan Bowles wants us to ask. Are we in disarray? I don't know. Let's see. The ample availability of competitive House districts is one reason there is a growing consensus, or at least a rising chorus, among the political class. I hate that political class. First of all, I'm tired of going back to class. Oh, yeah, the kids are gone. Speaking of going back to class, can you believe it? They're back in school, and that's why you don't hear any coughing in the background. I might start coughing just to make myself feel better. I'm lonely now. I miss it. It was a good 2 weeks off, and, it was time. Anyway, among the political class, who may or may not be coughing, they are proclaiming a tsunami in the making across America. If that turns out to be the case, Democrats would have the power to frustrate Trump's and the GOP's agenda. That's one way of putting it. While putting the president himself under a microscope. And it would have to be a very big microscope, I promise you. Believe me. Many Democrats salivate at the prospect, and that's supposed to be a bad thing. But apparently, it's not bothering the rest of us. Let's see. If by problems, we're talking about problems in America? You mean we are wrestling with America's problems? Well, that's what we do. Look at this. This is the undisputed highlight of 2017. I believe I recognize it instantly. It is the distinguished American professor working out of South Korea who had joined the news program via Skype when his daughter burst onto the scene and traipsed through the screen confidently as ever. Probably about 30 years till she's eligible for the presidency. Maybe a little bit less now. So looking forward to that one. Moving on, let's see what else is in Greg's Roundup. The New York Times reporting, Mr. Trump is the 45th president of the United States. Were you aware of that? They are. But he has spent much of his time of his first year in office defying the conventions and norms established by the previous 44. We're aware of this. And transforming the presidency in ways that were once unimaginable. Is this this must be the article about which everyone was complaining from the New York Times over the weekend. Yes. For Trump, a year of reinventing the presidency. It's sort of a half a bash with a twist. Almost an admiring portrait. I think that's what people were complaining about. There was this too much admiration written into this, and it's backhanded admiration. Like, well, he's really redefined the presidency. That is to say, you used to think that smart people were what was called for to become president. And you used to think, perhaps, that it was okay, maybe, if a not very smart person became president because he would surround himself with decent people who knew what they were doing and understood how to work the levers of government. And it turned out that wasn't true either. So he's redefining the presidency. It's a bigger disaster than ever, and he's defining it as such, but that's not a good thing. Anyway, as they put it, he has spent much of his first year in office defying the conventions and norms established by the previous 44 presidents and transforming the presidency in ways that were once unimaginable. That is one way of saying it, yes. Under Mr. Trump, it has become a blunt instrument to advance personal, policy, and political goals. He has revolutionized the way presidents deal with the world beyond 1600 Pennsylvania Avenue, dispensing with the carefully modulated messaging of past chief executives in favor of no-holds-barred, crystal-breaking, us against them, damn the consequences blasts, born out of gut and grievance. Accurate, as Greg says, and shameful. His enablers have a lot to answer for, and that is true. Biggest news development in terms of the big picture, Trump-Russia big picture anyway. Also, I think thanks to the New York Times, yes, how the Russia inquiry began. A campaign aide drinks and I don't even know what else. Drinks and talk of political dirt. It's George Papadopoulos. By now, again, I won't be breaking any news to tell you that this is at the top of the charts for the weekend, but there's definitely some interesting reading to be done there. I don't see how any of you could have refrained from reading excerpts or watching people discuss it. Long story short here, I guess there's two stories running here, but the long story short version of this one, if by some chance you haven't read it, is the FBI's original opening of the Trump-Russia investigation during the campaign. And remember, this goes back to like July or so of 2016. One story being, oh yeah, they were investigating him that far back. Another story being, of course, oh yeah, James Comey did issue a letter, I guess, holding out the possibility that one candidate was in fact in huge trouble with federal law enforcement officials 11 days or so before the end of the campaign. But that was the other one. Hillary Clinton, oh my God, we're reopening our investigation. And then, of course, a few days later, oh no, we aren't, and it was closed, and it always was. And I hope you can absorb that in the next 2 days before the election. That's what we've all been focusing on. But yeah, this sort of brings us back to the point that at no point during the election did anybody say Donald Trump was under investigation, and yet he was, and they still thought we might actually have something on this guy. We might be finding out that he's actually guilty of something very, very serious, but what the hell, we'll kind of hold it close. So there's a little bit of that involved in it too. But for many people, this was actually somehow the first time that it had registered with them that there was an investigation into Trump predating the widespread knowledge of the existence of the Steele dossier. That doesn't matter a great deal. I mean, honestly, this is true, and we've known it's been true. And this story isn't the first to reveal, by any means, that there was such an investigation. But it served as a good reminder for those of you who knew and, may have put the fact aside or just sort of assumed it as background noise. Great for people who had no idea that there was such an investigation. And if you followed, let's say, Trump's pronouncements and Trump supporters' pronouncements and Trump supporting media's announcements, Fox and Friends, Breitbart, etc., we know you'd be woefully uninformed, misinformed, really. But at this point, it's become doctrinaire for them to say that it was the dossier that sparked the FBI investigation. It didn't. And further, of course, they say the dossier is false and has been proven to be, junk and full of lies. It's in fact been proven the opposite. The vast majority of it has been corroborated, although we're still waiting on that P tape. It could drop any time. I don't know if that's going to do anything at this point. He's done a great job of inoculating himself against it, and now probably really wouldn't have that huge of an impact, but it would make for a big party. And I'd buy a copy. I mean, if people could buy the copies of the Star Report, I'll buy a copy of the P tape. Let me have it. I'll take it. I don't think I want to actually watch that. It's just something I want to put in a vault. I want to have in a time capsule. Next time my town buries a time capsule or something, I'll put the P tape in it. It's already a time capsule in itself. I don't know where I'm going to get a VCR to play the thing. So I hope they'll issue it on DVD. Blu-ray, if they're lucky. Yellow Ray is what they really ought to use for that. Just special edition. Anyway, so they've been claiming for the longest time now on Fox News and elsewhere that this fake dossier is what launched the FBI probe. This is a good reminder, if not eye-opener, for the rest of the world that no, the investigation was underway long before there was widespread knowledge of the existence of the dossier. And two, probably no one's surprise, this article seems to hint, I mean, it says it outright, but I don't know if it's entirely true, that the FBI's probe basically began when Papadopoulos, hired mostly because he reminded Trump of Trump, I think, was impossibly blabbermouthed and braggartly. Is that a word? Braggart. He was an impossible braggart. And he was out drinking in London with an Australian diplomat, which is a terrible idea if you can't hold your liquor, and not a really good idea even if you can, honestly. But he blabbed to him about the dirt that he was arranging to get from the Russians on Hillary Clinton. He had blabbed earlier, by the way, but it didn't make its way all the way to the FBI. But the Australians essentially reported, their top diplomat / spy, I mean, they're always on the lookout for information like this, had to go back to his government and say, I got to tell you something. A guy who says he's high up in the Trump campaign, of course, has spent the last year denying that he was high up in the campaign, but he really was, and this article reaffirms it. A guy high up in the Trump campaign tells me that they are waiting to get dirt in the form of emails, possibly stolen emails, that have dirt on Hillary Clinton, and that the Russians are helping them get them. And I don't know if he described to this Australian ambassador or diplomat that they were hacked in some way, but that's certainly the explanation that's given, and it gets back to Australia, and the Australian government, relays this to their own intelligence network, their own intelligence community, and at some point the intelligence community of Australia says this is becoming a credible thing, and other reports were coming in from elsewhere of similar stories, and they all told the FBI, and the FBI by July says, oh my God, we better investigate this. All of our intelligence partners tell us the Russians may be hacking the DNC to help Trump. And there it was. That was it. Just his babbling and bragging. Amazing. We'll be back after this babbling and bragging next. Welcome back to the Kagro in the Morning Show here on Netroots Radio. Well, we're going to continue with these break things during 2018. I think they've served us in good stead, and I could use the break from time to time. It struck me, as I said, at the end of last year, so long ago, last year, that I was coming up on 254. I did 254 shows last year. I had done, at that point, 253 and was in the middle of the 254th. Generally speaking, all 2-hour shows. I believe there was one show that came up short, that we had technical difficulties and missed the first half hour or so of the show, and we were just set behind. But it's a good number of hours. I don't know how we filled all of those things or kept you interested for all of those hours, but another good opportunity to bring up once again. Of course, the Patreon account remains viable. And those of you who may have stormed off from Patreon in a huff when they announced that they were changing their fee structure such that you would be charged more than you had agreed to pledge to cover those fees, they have, in fact, realized the error of their ways and reversed that. And I am hopeful that those of you who fled Patreon, particularly those of you who are small dollar donors for whom it no longer made any particular sense to be donating $1, $2, even $3 a month, given that the fees were going to hike that number by some monstrous percentage. The larger the donation, the less impact it had. And of course, we love large donations, sure, but honestly, most people were saying, I'll put $1 or $2 in the pot each month. That's fine. And it made it just ridiculous to do with the fees. Well, the fee situation being reversed, we hope you will find your way back to Patreon, or of course, there are other methods available. The Square Cash, Cash Me, straight, direct, one-time thing. You can just send cash basically just like PayPal, operated by the people who run Square, the credit card processors that you sometimes see. For instance, if you're dealing with a street vendor or someone at an art show or farmer's market or something like that, and they run your credit card through one of those little devices that they plug into their iPhone. Those guys are the ones who run the Square Cash, Cash Me operation that we use to handle one-time donations, although The PayPal account is still there, and if PayPal is the thing with which you are most comfortable and you've been thinking about making a donation to keep the show up and running, not only can we arrange for that to be done automatically monthly, but of course one-time donations also very much welcome and very possible. Drop us a line, just as you would to drop us your notes that you may have recorded for us to include in the show. Kagrox, K-A-G-R-O-X, at gmail.com. Simple enough. You can even find me on the Daily Kos internal email system, or find me online at Twitter, also at Kagrox, K-A-G-R-O-X. Easy enough. And let me know that you are in need of that PayPal address. I will gladly send it to you. And first equipment purchase of the new year underway. We're waiting patiently. Got a good post-Christmas deal on a new pair of headphones, a fairly significant discount on a nice pair of Sony headphones. Should be here any time now. I've literally been holding these things together with double-sided tape for the longest time, and now it's just time to replace them. The second ear pad is now in tatters, and basically holding this thing together with rubber bands and tape at this point. I think we can we can afford to replace the headphones once every, what are we on here, like 5 years at this point. We're being pretty frugal with the money, I must say, and I'm hopeful that we'll be able to give more of it away to Scott, who's faithfully continued to do our show summaries. And if we can rake in thousands upon thousands of dollars monthly, which would be fantastic. We do not at this point. But if we did, maybe we could even put together a more professional staff who could handle things with, let's say, greater aplomb, and give me time to go golfing with Donald Trump. I have not been able to do that in some time. That is to say, ever. And I don't know that I would. Anyway, we left off before the break discussing the big Trump-Russia story of the weekend, and we probably ought to comb through this thing just a little bit to be sure that we get to make all of the really interesting and fun points. The long story short situation of it, though, was that, like we said, George Papadopoulos found himself drinking in a bar in Australia with Australian diplomat Alexander Downer, who is apparently a bit of a character himself, and spilling the beans to him that he was waiting around for this dirt in the form of emails from the Russians. Now, apparently, we learned this part of the story earlier, that he had been in contact, Papadopoulos, with a professor of sorts in London somewhere, who I guess taught at a school now defunct of some. Here it is. He actually met him traveling in Italy, but he also was London-based. Joseph Mifsud, a Maltese professor at a now defunct London academy. That's how he's described by the Times, who had valuable contacts with the Russian Ministry of Foreign Affairs. Mr. Mifsud showed little interest in Mr. Papadopoulos at first, but when he found out he was a big macher, as they say, and as the Trump campaign denies, in the Trump campaign, they became fast friends. And it was Mifsud who, I guess, first told Papadopoulos that this dirt was out there and available. And I think this was in April of last year, according to the story. And one of the more interesting parts about it is how the Times puts it. And I don't know if I can find the exact part all that quickly, but the deal was, here's the April mention. Mr. Papadopoulos was trusted enough to edit the outline of Mr. Trump's first major foreign policy speech. Oh, here's it, on April 27th. An address in which the candidate said it was possible to improve relations with Russia. Mr. Papadopoulos flagged the speech to his newfound Russia contacts that he found through Mifsud, and basically tried from that point on to arrange meetings between Trump and Putin or their highest level representatives. This part actually offered in refutation of the Trump camp claim that Papadopoulos was nothing more than a coffee boy for the campaign. Perhaps a glorified coffee boy, but a coffee boy nonetheless. Well, he's editing his first foreign policy speech as a candidate, so I don't know if anybody's going to believe that. Anyway, oh, by the way, as the guy who interviewed him and placed him in the campaign, Sam Clovis, making another appearance in this melodrama. Let's see. Oh, yes, here we are. The other mention of April. In late April, at a London hotel, Mr. Mifsud told Mr. Papadopoulos that he had just learned from high-level Russian officials in Moscow that the Russians had dirt on Mrs. Clinton in the form of thousands of emails. This is where the original provenance of this dirt and thousands of emails phrasing that keeps coming up in this investigation. Anyway, that's according to court documents. Although Russian hackers had been mining data from the Democratic National Committee's computers for months, that information was not yet public. Even the committee itself did not know. This was the subject of some discussion over the weekend, and I think is correctly seen as a latter-day Watergate. Watergate, of course, being the physical break-in and burglary of the Democratic National Committee's headquarters in 1972. This is basically the same thing. Except rather than having the Republicans send their own operatives to rifle the files at the DNC looking for dirt, the Russians freelanced it, did it on their own, and knew enough about the American political system, and probably a great deal more, to be able to say, all right, well, the person that's going to be interested in the dirt on the Democratic candidate is the candidate of the other party, the Republican Party. We know which one that is. That's Donald Trump. Let's bring it to him. It may or may not have been solicited in some way, and we may yet find that the Trump campaign solicited the Russians or anybody, any non-state actors, to do this for them. But I haven't seen that claimed at any point. But I don't know whether that would even help necessarily clarify things. I think it's pretty clear as it is. If the Russians freelance it and hack the DNC and pick up some dirt and shop it to the Republicans, and the Republicans not only don't report it, but take it and then try to conceal it, well, I mean, that's just at best being an accomplice after the fact to the break-in. And everybody understands the inherent wrongness of breaking into the Democratic National Committee headquarters to steal information with which you're going to win the election. And it wasn't even necessary in 1972. Here, doing so in collusion with Russia, that should be pretty easy to understand. Although many people did point out to me over the weekend that it took some time in between the actual discovery of the burglary and the point at which a majority of the American people were willing to acknowledge that this was an important development and bad news, and something for which the president either had to resign or face impeachment. But I do think that there was probably a pretty, I mean, the historical record is such that the wave insisting on something being done, the president either leaving office or being impeached, was slow to develop. And that's a good thing to cling to in terms of your hopes for today. I mean, if you're wondering why this isn't already instantly recognized universally as reason to remove him from office. But I also think that it was pretty clear early on certainly to Democratic observers, this is the sort of thing that really can't be done. Okay, physically breaking into the other party's headquarters to try to search for files that could be used against them is pretty universally understood to be a bad thing to do, and something you're going to have to answer for, and is going to be awfully embarrassing if it rises to the level that the president is involved. And I don't know that anybody at the time ever bothered to defend it as, well, I didn't do it, and even if I did, I'm allowed to. I mean, eventually Nixon comes around to saying, if the president orders you to do it, it isn't illegal. But I don't know that he was necessarily referring at that point to the break-in, but rather to other parts of the various conspiracies which he was covering up. But I don't know. I don't know that it was quite as brazen. But then again, I wasn't really aware at the time necessarily. So perhaps there are others of you with a different perspective on it. At any rate, I think it ought to be understood very clearly as a latter-day Watergate, and we now at least pretty collectively understand that Watergate was something pretty bad. Although I must say, the damage has been done. 45 years of relitigating Watergate may have left us susceptible to the claim that this, too, is something that the president can do, even though he didn't do it. If he wanted to, he totally could. Anyway, this was a very interesting story, and just interesting in that it stood for the proposition that, one, the dossier is not necessary to the opening of the investigation, and two, the very weird and critical story that multiple allies had come to the FBI and said, we hear all over the place that the Russians are meddling in this campaign, and you need to be aware of it. Of course, when that news eventually reached the Republican leadership in the House and Senate, in the Senate, we have Mitch McConnell registering his opposition to the Obama administration's efforts to combat this. And it was reported early on that Mitch McConnell made it clear that if there were any public announcement of this investigation going on, he would insist that this was a political ploy designed to register as an attack on Trump, then the Republican nominee, and that he wouldn't stand for it, and he would accuse the president of having politicized the whole thing, trying in an effort to interfere in the election, essentially. And apparently that was taken seriously enough that they backed off of making any such announcement. I don't know whether it was driven by the Obama White House necessarily so much as by the FBI, although, again, it is odd that to imagine James Comey sitting there saying, no, really, Mr. President, although you would encourage us to make a public announcement, I would push back very strongly against that in the name of the integrity of the FBI. We really don't want to be interfering in our own election, especially if we're busy investigating whether or not a foreign power is interfering in our election. We don't want to interfere by revealing their interference unless we're ready to shut it down and can prove our case. And I could see that being settled that way. Of course, it becomes more difficult to understand settling it that way, given what Comey decided to do instead with regard to the investigations into Hillary Clinton. But it is what it is. We can't really explain it. I think the best possible explanation so far that I've heard, that is to say, the best explanation that might possibly be true, not the best possible explanation. There could always be a better explanation yet to come, is that Comey and those in the FBI just really didn't expect Trump to win, and they wanted to look like they had handled the inquiries properly and even been perhaps tougher on Hillary Clinton than on Donald Trump, because the odds were she was going to win, and the FBI would look like it had done a thorough job but had stayed as much out of politics as possible without ignoring what was going on. And yet Hillary Clinton had won, and what can you do? And she's clear now, so we're all back on the same foot, and the tough, hard-charging, always fair agents at the FBI are still going to be on the case, but what can I tell you? We looked into this, and nothing happened over here. Whereas with Donald Trump, they were probably more convinced that something was going on and that they hadn't gotten to the bottom of it, but that when they did, it wouldn't be something that they could simply clear him of, but he would instead be dispensed with and no longer be the FBI's problem, as he was defeated in the election and returned to private life. And if they felt like it, then maybe the Attorney General of New York could continue to pursue the money laundering charges against Donald Trump if they felt like that made them look good. But I'm not certain that they would have agreed to that. Anyway, I think that's probably what was going on, and that's probably why they kept it under wraps. But imagine what's going on here. This second section of the piece, A Secretive Investigation, as it is subtitled here, really paints a dire picture inside the FBI, that in July they begin to hear from other governments that your Republican nominee may be accepting illegal help in the form of hacked emails from the Democratic National Committee via the Russians. And we're not even sure whether it's private Russians, oligarch private Russians, or government-directed Russians, or whether we can tell the difference between the two, or if there is any difference between the two. At the same time, they then begin to look around at the behest of these other foreign intelligence outfits and suddenly see what? People like Carter Page and others making trips unbidden and inexplicable trips, because why would you be doing this, to Moscow and meeting with all sorts of people, some of whom shadier than others, and then coming back and being described by Trump as top-ranking foreign policy advisors. I imagine that the people who decided to open the investigation, I don't know whether they thought it was going to pan out or not, but all of a sudden you begin seeing all this activity involving trips to Russia and thinking, wow, there must really be something to it. Anyway, much more to this story, of course, and we'll pick it apart more in the coming days as more writing and discussion is offered about it. But I know you've seen the story by now. I felt like we had to comment on it and linger on it a little bit, spend some time on it. In the interim, let's see. Oh, we also had some commentary coming in during our past couple minutes. Oh, even going further back. Rebecca has also sent us another story out of Alabama. Alabama really killing it in the news these days. Oh, by the way, breaking news the Hill has here. Anthony Scaramucci, apparently, now bragging about a possible return to the White House. Remember, of course, Donald Trump for the longest time kept insisting that he was going to rehire Michael Flynn. But, of course, now that Flynn's involved in his guilty plea and the follow-up to that, I imagine he's probably not coming back. Also, now hitting the wires here, Daily Kos front page, moron in chief now taking credit for planes not crashing. That's been the morning Twitter chatter from the president, insisting that this past year's safety record in aviation, which is a worldwide effort and a worldwide record, no commercial jet airliners crashed in 2017, which is nice. You like that. Trump is insisting that because he was getting tough on the industry, which is, of course, the opposite of what was happening in any industry. And I don't even recall him doing anything at all with the airline industry. But them not crashing, also his doing, because he's an idiot. But Rebecca has sent me another piece here from Raw Story, just for flavor. I'll throw you the headline here. Alabama newspaper editor, quote, regrets spanking women reporters as a very young man in his 40s. I thought that it had said in the 40s. Like, well, not that that was any better, but I think we could, I'd more readily, if not forgive, forget about, just put aside, well, in the 1940s, okay, no, his 40s. Well, he was a very young man, like Henry Hyde was when he had his extramarital indiscretion. But this man is no longer in his 40s. I can tell you that just by looking at the picture. He is H. Brant Ayers of the Anniston Star, I guess. Look at this. Longtime Alabama newspaper publisher admits to sexually assaulting women reporters and says he now regrets his actions. Veronica Pike Kennedy, a former reporter for the Anniston Star, revealed H. Brant Ayers forcibly spanked her in the 1970s during an incident in which when they were among the few workers in the building, the newspaper reported. I was still determined to be a reporter after that, Kennedy said, but I hated Brandy, that's what they called him, Brandy Ayers with every cell in my body. Well, I would too. He's 82 years old now. He blamed his actions 4 decades ago on youthful immaturity. I don't know exactly what was going on, but it sounds like your basic everyday sexual harassment, except it was going on a Saturday. Well, here's the rundown in case you're curious about it. They were in the newsroom on a Saturday when Ayers asked her to read an article he'd written and then told her she'd been a bad girl and needed to be spanked. I started laughing because I thought it was the funniest thing I'd ever heard, she said. The publisher then used a pica pole, a metal ruler used in those days to measure out the size of printed type, which I think actually means it is pica, right? P-I-C-A, and tried to pull Kennedy from her chair, the reporter said. I was literally holding on to the chair. She said, he picked me up and the chair up and wrestled the chair out of my hands and he started spanking me. That is odd. So, bad news. Everyone drop your subscription to the Aniston Star, if you have one. Well, I don't know. He may even be retired from there. But these stories, they happened. They need to come out. I mean, it's a sideshow for the most part for us, but I'm glad that yet another victim has been encouraged to clarify the record here. I don't think it's going to result in anybody getting fired, so maybe it's just out and out, like I'm just filling in blanks on the record. We can always accept that. Here's a comment from Culture of Truth, who tweets as Bobble Speak, of course. Joseph Mifsud is the topic here. Mifsud and Papadopoulos also both know each other from the London Centre of International Law Practice, which he's enclosed in scare quotes for good reason. I don't know what it is, and I suspect he doesn't either. In fact, probably nobody does. That may be the academy that's now defunct that they were describing. So, I'm glad to have the name available. All right. Let's see. Other things that we can poke into just a little bit. Oh, yes, we still have the abbreviated pundit roundup to lean on. Just by way of cleaning up the long weekend here, Ross Douthat in the New York Times on the follies of being a deficit hawk. Some Republicans now discovering, if they've got one foot at least in the never Trump camp, that Republicans have been full of it and have been awful hypocrites on the federal debt and the economy in general, because, of course, they've always been highly critical of so-called tax and spend liberal Democrats. And they are, of course, raising everybody's taxes, except if you're a millionaire, in which case they're cutting your taxes and exploding the deficit and debt. Let's, as Marco Rubio might have said, dispense with the fiction that they have any concern about deficit spending at all. And maybe we all should dispense with that concern anyway, but they used it as a cudgel for many years. And then, of course, when it was their turn to blow up the debt, I lost the cudgel. Wow. It's weird. And everybody was speculating over the weekend that they'll go right back to it next Democratic president. And they're probably right. And we'll all watch it happen in real time and say, I can't believe it. Believe that. Let's see, Richard Haas, writing in The Atlantic. We have this piece, America and the Great Abdication. Don't mistake Donald Trump's withdrawal from the world for isolationism. That's an interesting point. And a brief excerpt here. That's what we like about the abbreviated pundit roundup. It abbreviates. Under Donald Trump, however, U.S. foreign policy shows clear signs of significant departure. That's for sure. Support for alliances, embrace of free trade, concern over climate change, championing of democracy and human rights, American leadership, per se. These and other fundamentals of American foreign policy have been questioned and more than once rejected. Trump is the first post-World War II American president to view the burdens of world leadership as outweighing the benefits. Well, yes. As a result, the United States has changed from the principal preserver of order to a principal disruptor. Maybe. But it's certainly the case that he sees the burdens as outweighing the benefits. He's a very lazy guy. He's just not into working. It's certainly not the case that the burdens do outweigh the benefits. It's just somebody who isn't interested in working is going to come to that conclusion. Somebody who isn't interested in working and who has a conscience might try anyway, or might resign and say, the truth is that the benefits do outweigh the burdens, and I'm not up to the job of pursuing the benefits, so I'll step aside and let somebody else do the job. but not Donald Trump. Not only is he lazy, he's too lazy to admit that he's lazy. What else have we got here? Embedded in the roundup, Matt Fuller's tweet that says, how the Russia investigation started is huge news, considering conservatives in Congress have been trying to show the dossier, was the basis for the FBI warrants. But just as we learned from New York Times, he pulls this one out and isolates the story of George Papadopoulos drunkenly bragging about the dirt as essentially the origins of the story. By the way, I do think it might be the case, and we may find out yet that this is true. As I mentioned, Papadopoulos blabs to the Australians first, and the Australians tell their government and intelligence community about it first, and presumably at some point the Australian intelligence agencies connecting with American intelligence agencies and then the FBI and letting them know this thing. And here's my question. Is it possible that this is the explanation for the otherwise really inexplicable behavior Donald Trump displayed in his first phone call with the Australian Prime Minister so early in his presidency? And I remember he hangs up on him and yells at him ostensibly about a refugee deal. But I wouldn't be surprised if Mike Flynn hadn't found out by that point and said, you need to rough these guys up. Welcome back to the Kagro in the Morning Show on Netroots Radio. As we wind down our 1 minute top of the hour break. Yeah, I was speculating, and I don't know whether we hold out hope that this will be the case. As we mentioned, there was ostensibly the anger over the refugee deal that we were going to. The United States was bound by an agreement with Australia to take and to admit a number of refugees who had been detained by Australia. And they were waiting to be relocated to the United States. I forget the details of the situation, though. We looked into it as soon as we heard that he had been hanging up on Prime Minister Turnbull and yelling at him during their exchange. And it's simple enough to imagine someone as childlike as Donald Trump actually getting huffy and hanging up over that and that alone. But I did note that from the photos of the conversation, they take pictures of the president talking on the phone because he's supposed to be an important guy. So they take pictures of those things. And I noticed that he's at the Resolute desk, whatever. And he's staffed at that point by Mike Flynn, notorious spy, and Steve Bannon, notorious jackass. And as between the two of them, I don't doubt that the temper is there. Although I have my... I wouldn't be shocked, but I'd be a little bit surprised to find out that Steve Bannon was the one who pursued this. Flynn seems more like the kind of person who would know to check this. He, as national security advisor at the time, before he was fired, he could have gotten word that the American intelligence community was looking into connections between the Trump campaign and Russia, and the FBI, that the FBI is investigating, et cetera, et cetera. And he may have, having heard this, decided to look into, well, how did this happen? Where did this start? Who ordered that? Who do I need to, ask the president to fire? And they may have, by that point, gotten the story that the FBI had opened an investigation as early as July. Why did they do it? And he was able to get somebody to comb through notes. And if it comes up somewhere in the notes, well, initially, the Australian government and the Australian intelligence community contacted our government and intelligence community in July and said, we got wind that there was some kind of strange collusion going on. They may or may not have told them the whole story. But if it reached the national security advisor that Australia's government and or intelligence community had said something, and that was the catalyst that sparked the investigation, it may have occurred to Mike Flynn to say something during this call as he's staffing the president and saying, by the way, we're talking to the Australians, who are, of course, allies, and you may or may not have had to say that to this president. explicitly. But this whole FBI thing that we're beginning to hear about, it actually started because of something the Australians told our FBI and or our intelligence community. So it's actually kind of their fault. But don't bring that up because that's still classified and you shouldn't share that information with them. Besides which, we have plenty to be angry about them, with them anyway. We'll yell at them about the refugee situation instead. It's entirely possible they had no notice of it, and it was all focused on the refugee situation. It just seemed awfully petty, and why Trump would be angry with Turnbull over the agreement rather than, say, Obama, I'm not entirely sure. But that was who was available to him at the time. So he got angry at him. All right. Well, anyway, back to our roundup. I just thought that was an interesting thought, and I do think we may yet find out that had something to do with it, and then we can all gasp at how immature and irresponsible the president really is. I'm going to skip over one or two of the other stories toward the end of the roundup. I'm sure Greg will bring them back into the picture perhaps tomorrow. But this one also I did see in my Twitter feed, and I think Kate Sherrill may have shared something like this with us as well. Weird note, definitely. An opinion piece in the Charlotte News Observer, noted here by Jim Roberts. North Carolina is no longer classified as a democracy. How about that? It ranks now alongside places like Cuba, Indonesia, and Sierra Leone. How? Why? Well, we'll give you the quick rundown of it from the News and Observer. Andrew Reynolds wrote this piece on December 22nd initially, 2016, by the way. Look at that, updated at the end of the year prior to this past year. Why is that now circulating? I don't know. That's a good question too. That's what says 2016. I don't know if that's really the case, but in 2005, in the midst of a career of traveling around the world to help set up elections in some of the world's most challenging places, Afghanistan, Burma, Egypt, Lebanon, South Africa, Sudan, and Yemen, among others, my Danish colleague, Jorgen Elklit, writes Andrew Reynolds, my Danish colleague and I designed the first comprehensive method for evaluating the quality of elections around the world. Our system measured 50 moving parts of an election process and covered everything from the legal framework to the polling day and counting of ballots. In 2012, Elklit and I worked with Pippa Norris of Harvard University, who used the system as a cornerstone of the Electoral Integrity Project. Since then, the EIP has measured 213 elections in 153 countries and is widely agreed to be the most accurate method for evaluating how free and fair and democratic elections are across time and place. When we evolved the project, I could never imagine that as we enter 2017, yeah, I guess so, my state, North Carolina, would perform so badly on this and other measures that so much so that they no longer considered North Carolina to be a fully functioning democracy. That is pretty amazing. Equally amazing, once again, how stories like this manage to regain currency in our weird news cycles. Maybe that's it. We eat everything up so quickly in each news cycle that we just can't wait for more, so we recycle old stuff instead. That is interesting. How did that come back up? When's the Jim Roberts tweet? Because I did see it over the weekend, people talking about it too. I don't know if I can find the date on that one, but I guess it must have been recent. Anyway, it has made the roundup once again, and a number of other items as well. Let's see, what else should we pick up on? Oh, yes, we didn't discuss at the end of last week as part of our review of the rambling interview that Trump gave to the New York Times. The major issue that we skipped over in discussing on Friday was his line about, I have the absolute right to do what I want with the Justice Department, Trump told the New York Times. But for purposes of hopefully thinking I'm going to be treated fairly, I've stayed uninvolved in this particular matter. He hasn't, of course, but scary enough. Even if he had stayed involved, we would all be freaked out by the idea of, I have the absolute right to do what I want with the Justice Department. Many people, including former Attorney General Eric Holder, chiming in on that and saying, no, you actually don't. Preet Bharara chiming in this way, no, you don't, but you do have the right to remain silent. So we wouldn't mind if he began to exercise this. New York Times, the never Trumper everyone still loves to hate, Bret Stephens, because climate change. Bret Stephens does say he's still a never Trumper, and we'll take note of that, I guess. And what would the excerpt that Greg has grabbed here says, of course, Neil Gorsuch on the Supreme Court. There's that, I guess, is an accomplishment for the Trump administration in their mind. What for a conservative is there to dislike about this policy record as the Trump administration rounds out its first year in office? That's the question I keep hearing from old friends on the right who voted with misgiving for Donald Trump last year and now find reasons to like him. I admit it gives me pause. See, he's a terrible person. I agree with every one of the policy decisions mentioned above. I don't even know what else there was, but Neil Gorsuch should be enough for you. But I still wish Hillary Clinton were president. How does that make sense? Can I still call myself conservative? The answer depends on your definition. Here's one I've always liked. The central conservative truth is that it is culture, not politics, that determines the success of a society, said the late Daniel Patrick Moynihan, to which he added, the central liberal truth is that politics can change a culture and save it from itself. Does that make any sense in terms of helping you understand why Bret Stephens can agree with all of the Trump administration policies but still be a never-Trumper? Doesn't help me very much, but I thought the better explanation came from, was it Tom Reynolds the other day, that basically said, I agree with some of the things, some of the policies, I just don't think that Donald Trump should be the one executing them because I don't trust him to do it correctly. I feel a little bit closer to that one myself. Not that I agree with the policies, but in certain cases where I might otherwise agree, either probably never agree with the policy, but maybe the prerogative by which the policy is formulated and executed. I understand. I want to give presidents the leeway to do some of these things. I just don't believe that he should be anywhere near the controls, because most of the basic assumptions we make about presidents operating within the bounds of law, or at least decency, are out the window with this guy, and we don't really have the tools to make sure that the powers and prerogatives that we allow the president these days, as the head of an empire, essentially, are attuned to this sort of, to children's hands, essentially. Literally is what I mean here. But I mean, not that he's the child, but of course, the hands are the size of a child. All right. What else have we here? New York Times chiming in once again. I guess this piece, conservatives, let's see what the headline is on this. The URL doesn't tell me exactly. Republican attacks on Mueller and the FBI opening a new rift in the GOP. Yes, okay, so we've heard a little bit about that one. Greg excerpting this part here. Undermining the FBI is not helping the United States protect its citizens. We don't know who she is, but she said it. Well, we could click through and figure it out. When people stop working with us, we have a bigger problem than politics. Sowing distrust undermines the integrity of the agents and analysts. They can ripple out to every other agency. Democrats, for their part, have tried to ratchet up their defense of Mr. Mueller and federal law enforcement, positions typically claimed by Republicans. More than 170 House Democrats penned a letter of support last week, and on the Senate floor, Senator Mark Warner, Virginia, the top Democrat on the Intelligence Committee, urged his colleagues to set clear red lines that Mr. Trump must not cross. We'll see if they ever get to that one. Whether the role reversal could become something more permanent remains to be seen, but Mr. King said Republicans should be concerned. I don't know if the Democrats would ever assume the mantle, but it certainly could weaken the hold that Republicans do have on being supporters of law enforcement, he said. And then Greg finally says, I especially like this one because of the cracks in the decades-old BS about Republicans being the law and order party, based on Nixon's hippie bashing and other ephemera. Let's see. And then back to the anger tweets of Donald Trump, and David from saying somebody showed him the non-Rasmussen poll in which he's awfully unpopular, and that explains most of his rage tweeting on any given day. Thanks, Greg. Good start, and now I think time to glance through Pocket and see what other things we have put aside in order to round up the weekend's happenings. I guess another 2018 themed piece that we have to make note of here came to me this morning via Think Progress. If we can get the computer up and running here. Trump made it 7 hours in 2018 before creating an international incident on Twitter. Melanie Schmitz wrote this up for Think Progress. The deal is this. Trump rang in the new year early Monday by attacking Pakistan on Twitter, a nuclear-armed country, by the way, with an already strained relationship with the United States. It always is delicate with Pakistan. The United States has foolishly given Pakistan more than $33 billion in aid over the last 15 years, he said, and they have given us nothing but lies and deceit. Ouch. Thinking of our leaders as fools. Well, they've got us there. Our leaders are fools. Well, he meant previous leaders, of course, but he couldn't fit that in his tweet. They give safe haven to the terrorists we hunt in Afghanistan with little help. No more. Well, the Pakistanis were pretty annoyed about that, and they tweeted in response as well. I did see that one, and they were pretty hotted up about that one, and with good reason. The tweet didn't seem to be in response to anything in particular, though. His initial tweet. Trump had been busy targeting Iran in the days prior. In a subsequent tweet on Monday, he blamed Iran for failing at every level despite the terrible deal made with them by the Obama administration. Trump's relationship with Pakistan, whose foreign minister, Khawaja M. Asif, on Monday promised to respond to Trump's tweet, grew tense in 2017. I did see the Pakistani military, I think, responding via tweet also and saying, I think they were particularly incensed about the ideas of giving safe haven to terrorists from Afghanistan who are kept safe in Pakistan. And they were pretty angry, but of course, very often those who do cross the rather porous border, and I do think that they are the first to admit that the border is not tight there as between Afghan and Pakistan, but those terrorists tend to kill the locals as well, and they are unhappy at having the terrorism pinned on them by calling these areas safe havens. It's just they are out of control of the Pakistani military. They're remote, and they've been invaded by terrorists willing to kill the local populace. It's not exactly the same thing as giving safe haven to them. And by the way, whenever we do find them in Pakistan, we tend to hunt them down, at least under the Obama administration, and kill them, and not bothering to inform the Pakistanis when we're about to do it, too. So adding insult to injury here. I don't know that it's a particularly dangerous thing. It doesn't rise to the level of having to necessarily remind everybody that Pakistan is a nuclear-capable country. I don't think they're going to nuke us over it, but probably more to the point, as difficult as it is for them to control their borders, given the geography and the ability of projecting power that far out from Pakistan's capital, it's tough stuff to do. But the real impact, I think, of irritating the Pakistanis is what cooperation they're able to give us in pinpointing things, pinpointing suspects, now just won't be coming our way, period. But not that I trusted Donald Trump to do anything with it seriously anyway. There's an awful lot going on. Let's see. Here's another interesting tidbit I didn't know about, but raises alarm bells. The sort of thing that I think needs to be entered on our record. and we'll have to keep an eye on. Did you catch this one? Romanian hackers. Did you know there were Romanian hackers? You should have guessed that there were Romanian hackers. Took over D.C. surveillance cameras just before the presidential inauguration, federal prosecutors say. Rachel Weiner, is she Weiner or Weiner? Anybody know? She's probably wishes she was Weiner, and actually is Weiner. But, well, Rachel, regardless, you've done a good job reporting this one. December 28th in the Washington Post, Romanian hackers took over 2/3 of the district's outdoor surveillance cameras just before President Trump's inauguration, according to federal criminal complaints unsealed on Thursday. The January attack affected 123 of the D.C. Police Department's 187 outdoor surveillance cameras, leaving them unable to record for several days. 2 Romanians, whom law enforcement officials describe as part of a bigger extortionist hacking group, are being charged in D.C. federal court with fraud and computer crimes. Basically, they assumed command of these things, and I guess they probably very often rely on the footage from these cameras in solving crimes around the district, and I'm sure it put a crimp in their plans to observe movements of traffic and people during a very big event, although it wasn't very big, as it turned out, the inauguration of Donald Trump at the beginning of, or the end of January of 2017. But they were up to the task, and they did an equipment check before heading into the inauguration weekend and found out, oh my God, 2/3 of our cameras are no longer under our control. It doesn't look like it had anything to do with Russia or any sort of nefarious plot to assassinate Donald Trump or anything like that. If you consider that to be nefarious, I don't know. I don't want to put words in your mouth. I'm not judging you. It's pretty nefarious, honestly. But, you might feel differently about it. And I don't want to insult you at this point because you're a dangerous person, honestly. I'm just stringing you along till the cops arrive. Anyway, doesn't seem to be the issue. Ransomware. Apparently, the article says it's not even clear that the hackers knew it was police equipment they were taking over. They simply wanted to take over something that somebody cared enough to hook up, and then maybe if they could extort some sort of ransom from them, they would return control to the owners. But instead, the police department basically just shut the cameras down and went out there and erased the infected software and reinstalled it and rebooted the system and regained control of their cameras a couple of days ahead of the inauguration, and everything went fine. And then they did a little bit of computer forensics and figured out who was behind this, and it turned out to be Romanians. A much more profitable avenue, guys. Look to the Macedonians. The fake news thing pays big, and I don't think anybody has been prosecuted for that, and it's not likely to happen anytime soon. So taking over the DC cameras didn't work out all that well, and they probably, I'm sure, given it to do over again, they probably wouldn't take over police equipment next time. But you never know. Anyway, let's see. I did pick up on this tweet over the weekend from Armando, and he may well want to discuss this at some point. He's in agreement here with a tweet from Josh Holland, of course, contributor to The Nation, and a host of his own political radio show as well, Politics and Reality Radio. It says right here in his Twitter bio. But he's commenting on, once again, the fact that we knew, or you should have remembered anyway, that the FBI administration or investigation into Trump did in fact predate knowledge of the dossier, and by some months at that. It wasn't in, or I guess what his point was here is that the investigation predates even the July date that the New York Times seems to impute to it, that they were already looking in May of 2016, which would mean that there was a FBI investigation of Trump-Russia connection in advance of the now infamous Trump Tower meeting between Donald Trump Jr., Jared Kushner, Paul Manafort, and Natalia Veselnitskaya and her band of wackos who showed up under the guise of wanting to discuss Russian adoption terms, that, of course, being cover for Magnitsky Act sanctions. The FBI was already on them. And I think we knew as much and probably had guessed as much anyway, but this is a good reminder. May of 2016, Josh's tweet says, that was in May of 2016, The Guardian reported that GCHQ, that is to say the United Kingdom's NSA, first alerted U.S. intel to suspicious contacts between Trump's inner circle and Russian operatives in late 2015. Over the next 6 months, several other Western intelligence agencies followed. That's what he was trying to highlight in response to Andrew Kaczynski's discussion of the New York Times piece. Kaczynski saying, New York Times asserts that Russia investigation began not with the dossier, but with George Papadopoulos telling diplomats in London that Russia had damaging Clinton emails, et cetera, et cetera. That was the long story short version of the New York Times story. Josh just pointing out that The Guardian had reported that there was trouble between Trump and Russia, or something that needed to be watched as early as late 2015. Armando saying, by the way, exactly this. I get the political significance of the Times story today because of the dossier drumbeat from the Trumpsters and their outlets, but the news that the investigation preceded the dossier is of long standing. And that is true. And I thought I might bring that up just to put Armando on the record there. Let's see. Other things that require some discussion. Where to begin? Let's see. How about this one? Time at Mar-a-Lago is a respite for Trump and a headache for his staff. This also got a lot of discussion over the weekend. This from the Washington Post, having just spent a week at Mar-a-Lago, blabbing to people and attending parties, including a New Year's Eve that looked like it was decorated by the Cheesecake Factory folks, and tweeted around over the weekend. Ashley Parker, Josh Dawsey put this thing together. He's just out of pocket all the time. This essentially a reaction, I think, to the unscripted and unplanned New York Times interview that we heard about at the end of the week. When President Trump sat down with a reporter for a wide-ranging 30-minute interview at his private golf club here on Thursday, not a single aide or advisor was present at the table, and not a single aide or advisor knew about it in advance. The interview was enabled by Christopher Ruddy, a club member with a level of personal access to the president in Florida that rankles White House staffers. He invited New York Times reporter Michael Schmidt and his personal guest to lunch at Trump International Golf Club and sat near Trump's regular table and took the reporter over to meet the president, who was still in his golf clothes because he was golfing. Denying it again, but golfing nonetheless. As word trickled back to the White House, advisors worked to reach the president, with Trump's personal aide interrupting at one point to hand him a cell phone with White House Communications Director Hope Hicks. How does she do it? On the line. She checked in on the interview from afar. In other words, his staff in Washington had to call on the phone to try to interrupt him when they found out, oh my God, he is, unbeknownst to us, babbling to the New York Times again, and he's going to make himself look stupid. And they were right, and he had already done it, and really calling to try to interrupt it only made him look dumber. The big news, though, of this piece, or the most interesting part of it, I think, right there up front, we knew that Christopher Ruddy had engineered this thing, but once again, this time an acknowledgement from the Washington Post of how easy it is, if you pay enough money to the Trump Organization, to engineer this sort of thing, to become known as the person who can engineer such a thing, and therefore become an important person and peddle that influence. All you need to do is know when Trump is in town and which one is his regular table, and you can control the news agenda for the next week. That's not good. We'll be right back. Welcome back to the Kagro in the Morning Show on Netroots Radio. Good to be back with you. We left off before this break talking about the headache of staffing the president from afar at Mar-a-Lago, or more to the point, the headache being that all of the good work, if they can call it that, that the White House staff does to keep the president contained, to control the flow of information to him at the White House, which he's working actively to circumvent, by the way. But all of that good work that they do is undone in his time at Mar-a-Lago in favor of a system whereby anyone with the means to pay Mar-a-Lago's initiation fee and monthly dues, etc., and or do the same at his golf clubs, can position themselves to influence the president. And of course, remember, this is a guy that everybody suspects the last person he talks to is able to dictate policy to him by suggesting something to him. And he just says, yeah, sure, great idea, and goes and insists on it. As we were just saying, more formally, it's put here in the Washington Post. Inside the White House, aides filter what information gets to Trump and who meets with him, trying to prevent rash or uninformed decisions. And that's the case of all White Houses. It's true. It's just never been as obviously necessary for a president that he has no filter whatsoever. He doesn't understand, that information that might be coming to him isn't necessarily good information. Other presidents are capable of making that judgment on their own, but their day is usually highly structured. This, though, it is unusual to have to do it this way in order to prevent a president of the United States from, say, attempting to bomb a fictional country should somebody try and prank him. I don't think that would happen in most other administrations. But we read a great deal about it, especially as the control of the White House transitioned to John Kelly when he became chief of staff. That was the big news. He was imposing new controls. He was imposing filters. He was imposing new discipline about who got access to the president and what he could hear from them and what he would be given in terms of printed materials to read. Right? We learned, for instance, as it says here, that his staff often monitors his call logs, with the chief of staff often listening in on calls, telling people to approach him when they want to approach the president, or rather the chief of staff when they want to speak to the president. And it had been sort of a free-for-all early on in the administration. White House officials said they appreciate that time at Mar-a-Lago is a respite for Trump. It's a familiar and comfortable haven for him to recharge while surrounded by his family and friends. Others would look at it more critically and say it's a familiar and comfortable place for a person in cognitive decline who has less and less idea daily where he is and what he's doing. At the resort, the president often is less riled by the sorts of stray comments on cable news that back in Washington might prompt an angry tweet or rejoinder, one aide said. But Mar-a-Lago is not necessarily a panacea for angry tweets. Trump has fired off a few agitated messages since arriving in Florida. I have an alternative explanation for that. I think he largely does the same thing in Mar-a-Lago that he does in the White House. It's just under slightly different circumstances. I think he spends his morning watching Fox and Friends regardless. But I think that in the White House, this is weird. This is totally supposition. I think in the White House, he's conscious that he's in the White House. And he knows what that means. He's presidenting right now. I'm being the president. When he's at Mar-a-Lago, it is a respite. He's on vacation. And he watches Fox and Friends, which he calls the news, differently. That is to say, I can watch the news. I think he thinks he's watching Fox and Friends and watching the news in the morning when he's at Mar-a-Lago or wherever he's on vacation, in vacation mode. Like if I see things, I don't have to respond necessarily. Also, he plays golf, generally speaking, in the mid-morning, early to mid-morning. He's off to the golf course instead of being trapped at home with the television. In the White House, he does have this compulsion to work, such as he does. I mean, it's not real work, and he's not actually doing anything. But I believe that he feels the difference between being at the White House and being on the job, and being at Mar-a-Lago or anywhere else, and being on vacation. his first priority on vacation is getting himself dressed to go and play golf, and angry tweeting about Fox and Friends gets in the way of that, for one thing. For another, I think he feels like he's obligated to work when he's at the White House. And in his mind, working and being president, well, that involves being knowledgeable about the news. And so I watch Fox and Friends. That's a bad way to become knowledgeable about anything, much less the news. But that's what he believes. And so he thinks he's on, he's on to perform. I'm supposed to be commenting on the news and showing the American people that I'm on it. And I'm going to get to the important stuff. And the important stuff is defined as what's on Fox and Friends. So I'll tweet and throw things and be generally perturbed and angry about stuff. Whereas when I'm on vacation, I don't have to say anything. And if I want to get to the golf course, I can. If there's something that moves me, I'll say it. But I don't feel obligated to do any presidenting right now. And in my mind, presidenting equals reacting to the news, and usually angrily, because that's the kind of news that Fox and Friends delivers, stuff that'll make you angry. And it'll make anybody angry, not just conservatives. Conservatives will be angry because they agree with it, and everyone else will be angry because they disagree with it. Anyway, more to the point that the White House staff wanted to make is the next paragraph. At Mar-a-Lago, anyone who can get within eyesight changes the game. That's like a bad situation to be in with the President of the United States, and a feeble-minded one at that. So anyone who can get within eyesight changes the game, said a former White House official speaking on the condition of anonymity to candidly discuss a sensitive subject and referring to club members and guests who sometimes try to influence the president on policy, share an opinion on his administration, or simply say hello. Everyone who is angling for something knows to be there. I think that's Steve Bannon, the former White House official, by the way, speaking on condition of anonymity. That just feels like him. And he probably resented that a great deal. All presidents have worked to escape the constraining bubble of Washington. When Barack Obama, near the end of his presidency, occasionally slipped the gates of the White House, he would joke that the bear is loose. Yet by that metaphor, Mar-a-Lago has become a veritable ursine playground, with Trump starring in the role of Chief Grizzly, calling outside advisors and confidants while playing both host and inquisitor to his club's wealthy members. Mar-a-Lago, said Roger Stone, a former Trump campaign advisor and longtime friend of the president's, allows Trump to be Trump. Nobody tells Donald Trump where he can and cannot go, Stone said. The president is able to get a lot of information that is normally blocked from getting to him. You don't have the minders. There's no doubt that he makes more calls. Trump's personal quarters are off limits to most club members. Several friends say they've never been inside. His regular routine is simple and predictable, and that's all it really takes. He wakes, watches television, tweets, makes phone calls, reads the paper, and quote-unquote works. He often emerges for golf if the weather allows, then returns to the club where he sometimes has lunch or meets with White House staffers. He then returns to his living quarters, emerging again for dinner. He used to stop by tables to chat or wander the patio, but has stopped that in recent months, club members and friends say. Inside, Trump now sets up a virtual rope line, said Ruddy, the chief executive of Newsmax, a conservative media company, where friends such as he, Marvel Entertainment chairman Ike Perlmutter, and local restaurant owner Lee Lipton come to say hello. Trump, for instance, recently chatted with Blackstone CEO Steve Schwartzman for 30 minutes after dining with son-in-law Jared Kushner and daughter Ivanka Trump, according to people familiar with the meeting. Since he became president, members' access to Trump has been tightened, said Shannon Donnelly, society editor of the Palm Beach Daily News. It is one of those places he can relax a little bit, but not anybody can just go up and talk to him at Mar-a-Lago, she said, before adding, unless he sees you, motions for you to come over and talk, come over and talk to him. Yeah, and that's why getting an eyesight, I guess, is the key thing. If you can catch his eye and get a wave, then you get to go over and blab and see if you can plant an idea in his head. Well, the article does go on at some length after that, but I thought those were the key points that came out of this one. By the way, the fact that the Palm Beach Post came up in there reminded me of something. Did I put this one aside. I think it's out here somewhere, but I don't know whether it managed to make its way into Pocket or not. But there was a letter to the editor, I guess, over the weekend down in Palm Beach. I might be able to come up with it on my Twitter feed, but I know that there were some stories about it, or some rounds of tweets about it as well. But the deal was that Trump had been after, for a long time, really, had been after permission, here it is, to build a helicopter landing pad, a helipad at Mar-a-Lago, because he loves to show off and fly in his Trump helicopters. And I guess I'm sure the plan was for him to be able to fly his private jet to West Palm Beach Airport, land there in a helicopter between there and Mar-a-Lago. And Mar-a-Lago being in Palm Beach, and Palm Beach being full of rich people, they were actually able to keep him from building this helipad for the longest time with noise worries. Legitimate. Helicopter's very loud. Anyway, after he became president, the town finally had to relent, essentially, because they made the argument to the town, well, he's president of the United States now. There's going to have to be the ability to get him out of there quickly, and that's going to mean by helicopter if necessary. And so, according to this tweet from Catherine Rampell from the Washington Post, it says here, Trump got not only got permission from the town of Palm Beach to finally build the helicopter pad, but he got the federal government to pay for the building of the helicopter pad at Mar-a-Lago. That's one of the perks, I guess, of being president. But there were conditions from Palm Beach. They were really reluctant in the town. They said, well, we'll permit it if the helicopter is, or the helipad is only used for official presidential business. You say you need it in case of emergency to get in or out in a hurry or for whatever. But okay, so fine. We'll even leave it up to you to define what an emergency situation is. But just so long as the only helicopters using this pad are, the Marine One helicopters, the helicopters used to transport the president, or I guess possibly high-ranking federal officials to where the president is, then fine. But this letter to the Palm Beach Daily News says, guess what? That's not what's happening here. Alexander Ives wrote this. Oh, I'm sorry. Well, it says opinion column, but then the headline is letter. Helipad at Mar-a-Lago for business related to the presidency. I don't know. Maybe this was a letter from the Palm Beach government to Trump saying this is how you're going to be able to use this thing. Anyway, I'll unravel the mystery here. On December 22nd, 2017, the Friday before Christmas, the new helipad at Mar-a-Lago was used for only the second time. Was it the president? Let's find out. A private business helicopter with the corporate Trump logo landed and took off from there a few hours before President Trump's arrival in the area via Air Force One. In other words, not the president and not official business. The only other time the new helipad has been used was on April 8th, 2017. So I guess it's not brand new. In that instance, it was also a private helicopter with the Trump corporate logo that landed and took off. Helicopter takeoff and landing in the town of Palm Beach is strictly regulated, as one might expect. Essentially, it is limited only to emergency helicopters such as Trauma Hawk, as they, I guess, what they call Trauma Hawk. Is that like Tomahawk? Is that why they do? That's not funny. And anyway, yeah, they have dumb names for those helicopters, although it's usually like Life Flight or something uplifting like that. Okay. Anyway, the point is strictly regulated. They don't want helicopters flying around in Palm Beach. So when President Trump moved to have the federal government build a helipad at Mar-a-Lago for him, he had to seek a waiver from normal town rules to allow for helicopter takeoff and landing. The issue was taken up at the January 10th, 2017 Town of Palm Beach Town Council meeting. Under the advisement of long-serving Town of Palm Beach legal counsel John Skip Randolph, the town council voted 5-0 to grant the waiver with the caveat that it only be used for government, not personal or private sector use. The fear here not only being, well, probably not so much that Trump would be flying in and out using his corporate helicopter, but that wealthy club members who don't live in the area necessarily would helicopter in and out to be sure that they could be in position to lobby Trump at the golf club or at the dinner on the patio or what have you. Or that the Trump organization would use the Trump corporate helicopter to ferry important guests in and out and cater to fat cats that way. If the president needs it and he's going to come in and out of Marine One, fine. Well, so far, that hasn't happened. And the only thing that has happened is the stuff they prohibited. Specifically, the council designated Mar-a-Lago for the takeoff and landing of helicopters pursuant to the provisions of Section 14-34 of the Town Code of Ordinances during the terms of office, term or terms, I guess the S is in parentheses, of office of the President-elect Donald J. Trump for business related to the presidency only. Given that both times the helipad has been used by a private business helicopter with the corporate Trump logo, and it's landed and taken off, it would seem to violate the waiver for allowing for business related to the presidency only. This is not an issue of politics. It has nothing to do with whether one does or does not agree with President Trump's policies. This is an issue of the rule of law. It's true. Well, the rule of local ordinance, anyway. An issue of the rule of law, and no one, not even the President of the United States, and not even in Palm Beach, should or can be above it. And that's all true. Alexander C. Ives has got it right. And by the way, he is a member of, is he a member of the ACLU? Is he a member of the Harvard Law faculty? Is he in the running for a seat on the Supreme Court? No, he is a member of the town's Architectural Commission. But he's right. He has a point. It's just funny that down in Palm Beach, they're for law and order when it comes to noise from helicopters making their stay at their mansions just a little bit less comfortable. But sometimes that's what it takes. Okay, just thought we would put that one on the record. Let's see. A few other items of interest to share here. Let me see if I can pull them up properly. This is an interesting thing. I got a letter from or an email from a listener that was curious to me. Let's see. Can I find it even? I thought I had a direct link to it, and apparently I do not. And I was wondering whether, that's not going to do the trick. All right. I think I might be able to find it in a different way. Oh, look, Armando is calling. We'll see whether this is intentional or not. Good morning, Armando. Hi, how you doing?
Hey, David. Sorry for calling later.
Hey, no problem.
Cut up and stuff.
Happy New Year.
I saw you mentioned me.
Yes.
I don't remember what I tweeted this. We're talking about, but the Palm Beach story got me thinking.
Ah, okay.
As you know, there's serious emoluments issues throughout the Trump situation. I think the D.C. hotel one is the one that's clearest. And that recent email that was produced that he's still involved.
Yes. Still gets briefings.
But the reality is the problem is more making money from a government lease, and that violates the clause in the Constitution that says the president shall only be paid a salary by the government, not in any other way, etc. But the Palm Beach thing is interesting to me because what happens when Trump is no longer president? Do we go and take the helipad back?
No, that's a sunk cost. I'm sure we lose that one. Now, I don't know what the town does. I guess the town was actually pretty clear, and they said they would no longer grant the variance after the end of his term or terms in office. So he'd have a helipad that's unusable.
It's unusable. Then what happens? Does Trump get to tell the government to come fix it, take it out, make it what it was before?
That's interesting. Yeah, he might want to demand, you need you to return this to grass. But
listen, this is the whole problem with Trump. He never divested or separated himself from his businesses, and it just creates a slew of problems.
Yes.
Again, we have a Republican Congress now, but should there be a Democratic House or Democratic Senate or both in 2019, I think that's got to be the first order of business, starting with just dealing with all the emoluments issues that the Trump presidency has created because he refused to divest his businesses.
Yeah, I mean, I think that's probably the most serious and direct of
I just think
the
it's
violations.
easy. I mean, it's right there in the Constitution. It's really, I say the domestic thing. A lot of people are focused on the foreign, and I think that's a fair point, but I just think it's not as much as a straight line as the domestic emoluments clause is. And, again, I'd start with the lease and the hotel. Remember, that's basically, of all his hotel properties, everything else is failing or suffering. But the D.C. hotel has been, a huge profit center for the Trump businesses. And it's founded on an illegal variance to the lease from the GSA. You recall that you and I were talking about this the moment it happened, and no one seems to care. That it's just remarkable. When I say no one, I mean the media, Congress, Democrat and Republican.
Yeah, everybody just sort of
just have given up on
smile about it. Like, he does this. The hotel thing is strange and weird all by itself because of the lease. But I mean, as you say, even minus that, the idea, for instance, that if you're willing to pay him $200,000, you can hang out with him for lunch every weekend during the winter is problematic in itself. Or even if he hadn't leased the hotel from the government, the idea that I'll separate myself, my sons are going to run the business, but he has people from the hotel come in and go over the books with him and asking questions and how's the business doing and is my being president making us more money? Like, that's exactly what you shouldn't be asking, sir. I know, but I want to know anyway. Well, okay, you have a real problem.
Yeah, I mean, even that, to some extent, if you wanted to do all that for free, a lawyer could argue, well, he can still run it, he just can't make any money at it.
Yeah. But,
I mean, I guess you could make that argument. The problem has always been, I'll go back to the analysis that was provided in that GSA memo.
Yeah.
It was nonsense. The money is not being earned, it's just not being delivered to him, even though it could be delivered, as you pointed out, with one change of a document.
Yes.
And there's no law that would prohibit that. I guess the GSA would say, well, when he starts getting money, then it becomes an emolument. But he's getting the money. It's being put in escrow or
not even that. It's just right. It's in a trust that says, oh, by the way, you can actually access this money right now if you want to. I didn't.
Yeah.
How do I know?
Yeah, and the thing that's most amazing about the hotel thing, not to harp on it, is it's pretty simple. They could have cabined off the hotel.
Yeah.
From his other businesses. They could have said, well, I'm divesting myself of my interest in the LLC that owns this hotel.
Right. It was a simple thing, and he didn't do it to show that there was nothing you could do about it.
No checks, no norms, no nothing.
So, that was pretty remarkable. And then the attempt at some point, and I guess it still stands, the GSA still continues to say, well, though the terms of the lease say that it can't be leased to a government official or employee, we're not sure that the president counts as one. I mean, suppose if you asked on the street, I want you to name 5 federal officials, any 5. Go ahead. If they don't name the president as one of them, I'd be astonished, right? Any federal officials whatsoever? Well, let's say this is the president, the vice president, I don't know, Supreme Court.
I don't even remember that argument that well. It just boggles the mind that anybody would make it.
Yeah.
The president is not only a government official, he is restricted by the Constitution to only being compensated his salary by the federal government.
Yeah.
What are they talking about? But listen, the shamelessness has been, you go back to the big press conference on his divestiture with his lawyers and a big stack of papers.
Yes.
And as I recall, they were all blank, right?
Right. They just wanted to have paper here.
They just had a big stack of papers.
Yes. Nobody was allowed to look at them.
Well, what do they say? Nothing, but they're a big stack of papers.
Yeah, he loves stacking papers. He just did it again with the tax thing, and he had a ribbon to cut for some reason. I don't know if you remember that. They put a ribbon around it. Listen, when I go to an event, I cut ribbons. Give me a ribbon.
It's just, listen, there's pride, and it's just shamelessness that goes beyond anything we've ever seen. You know, what, the Washington Post basically found 2,000 lies that Trump made. The fact is, he lies 95% of the time. I don't know when he really tells the truth. And it's a shocker when he does. This morning, as you know, he said any number of things, and it would be shocking if any of them were true. Like he stopped plane crashes,
right,
which I'm sure you covered.
Yes.
I said, well, how did you do that? You've been cutting regulations. What did you do? By just tweeting at planes and they stopped crashing? I
heard planes didn't crash. Must have been me. I mean, that's all he's doing. I don't know what he thinks he was doing with that, but yeah, it's been a hell of a year, and the weekend really capped it off nicely, and plenty to talk about with him, certainly.
Yeah, I mean, it all started all over again. I mean, this morning was like, it's a new year, but everything's the same.
Yes,
right
back
now.
to work. So a little bit of golf, and now back to blaming everything on everybody else, and reversing every regulation possible. By the way, largely because
except
it happened
for the
Obama.
Airline crashes, in which case apparently he added new regulations that we don't know about.
Oh yes, right. He was very tough on the airlines. Somehow, I'm not even certain what that was supposed to be.
Somehow, I assume someone will ask if there is press briefings today. Someone will ask the White House, what exactly is the president talking about? How was he tough on airlines?
And no one will know. And Sarah Sanders will say the president has been very clear about this or something. Yeah,
he's been very clear about this. Absolutely.
The end. So that'll be it. I don't know. We'll pick up tomorrow.
That'll be it.
Tomorrow or Thursday after they have this press conference, we'll be able to react and laugh at that. But in the meantime, I do have to wind things up. Thanks for calling in, though. Just good to hear from you.
Give me 10 minutes to unburden myself. Thank you.
No problem.
Bye-bye.
Happy New Year. We'll talk again soon. And almost time for me to roll our outro music. Oops, here we go. We got to get rid of this thing here, by the way. This keeps getting in the way of properly getting my outro music queued up. I've rearranged things. Here we are. Anyway, yes, we'll try and catch up also in the rest of the week after speaking with Greg and Joan McCarter. Don't forget, tomorrow we'll catch up on all these stupid things that Trump has announced he's rolling back. Or they're not stupid things. I mean, they were stupid announcements. He's rolling things back for stupid reasons, including, by the way, I think that they put it this way. They said, Trump, I'm going to roll back the burdensome regulations of offshore drilling because we really need to free our energy producers to meet our energy needs in the future, and there's a vast fortune out there waiting to be had, and Obama's excessive regulations were getting in the way, and of course that was designed to make people say, we really do need to drill here, drill now, pay less, even though that was never valid in the first place. But somebody said, another way of saying this is Trump is going to undo the post-Deepwater Horizon safety rules for offshore drilling designed to help prevent another well from leaking all over the place and exploding and killing everybody on it. Oh, okay. Well, I was in favor of those. See? All right. Well, we'll catch up with all of that. In the meantime, time to hand the microphones over to Justice Putnam, who brings you the West Coast Cookbook and Speakeasy. Comes up today. Tarrytown Chowder is today's special for Tuesday. They'll have a clip of Third Way co-founder Jim Kessler telling Fox News Republicans are facing a bloodbath in 2018.
From Daily Kos Radio on netrootsradio.com. You have been listening to the Kagro in the Morning Show
with David Waldman.
More on what's coming next. Chris Kobach, the voter fraud czar, whines the lawsuits are slowing down his voter suppression efforts. Oh no. And Attorney General Jeff Sessions takes a stand for debtors' prisons. Hooray! Trump urges the Department of Justice to jail Jim Comey, Clinton aide Huma Abedin, and others after a Fox News report on New Year's Day. Coming next.